Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. As always, we have a packed show for you with all the top news stories from around the globe. Let's get started with our big focus. Kamala Harris has raised a whopping $200 million in the week since she became the Democratic Party's presidential candidate. That's what her election campaign announced on Sunday, adding that Harris has also signed up 170,000 new volunteers. This as Republicans continue to hammer Harris over her record as vice president. Kamala Harris told her supporters, "We got a fight ahead of us and we are the underdogs in this race. But this is a people-powered campaign and we have momentum." The day after I announced my candidacy, we saw the best 24 hours of grassroots funding in presidential campaign history. She added, "And you may have noticed Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record, and some of what he and his running mate are saying, it's just plain weird." President Joe Biden ended his re-election bid a week ago and immediately endorsed Harris for the 5th November vote against Republican candidate and former President Donald Trump. Since then, Harris has also received endorsement from former President Barack Obama and his wife Michelle Obama, the most towering figures in the Democratic Party, former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, and most influential Democrats in the US Congress. Polls over the past week show Harris and Trump essentially tied, setting the stage for a close-fought campaign over the 100 days left until the election. Trump's campaign said in early July that it had raised $331 million in the second quarter, topping the $264 million that Biden's campaign and its Democratic allies raised in the same period. Kamala Harris has secured, as we said, the support of a majority of delegates to the Democratic National Convention, likely ensuring that she will become the party's undisputed nominee for president next month. Biden withdrew from the race amid questions about his Asian health following a faltering debate performance against Trump in late June. Biden has pledged to remain in office as president until his term ends on the 20th of January next year. Harris's takeover has re-energized a campaign that had faltered badly amidst Democrats' doubts about Biden's chances of defeating Trump. A New York Times Siena College national poll published last week found Harris has narrowed what had been a sizable Trump lead, while Trump had a 2 percentage point lead over her in a Wall Street Journal poll. A Reuters Ipsos poll published on the 23rd of July showed a 2-point lead for Harris over Trump. Republican attacks on Kamala Harris, the first woman and first Black and South Asian individual to serve as US Vice President, have intensified in recent days. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis recently said Harris was incredibly vapid and predicted that Democrats would issue a blizzard of lies to distance Harris from the Biden administration's policies on immigration and other issues. DeSantis said they have to whitewash Harris's background to be able to make her palatable to the American people. Some Trump allies, including members of the Black Americans for Trump coalition, have warned that disparaging Harris could hurt the former president in his outreach to black voters, a crucial demographic in the 5th November presidential election. And then there are analysts who say Kamala Harris had one of the best weeks that have been seen in politics in the US in the last 50 years. This is going to be a very close race, they predict.
So to everyone here and all the friends, I say, ultimately in this election, I do believe that each one of us faces a question. That question being, what kind of country do we want to live in? Do we want to live in a country of freedom, compassion, and rule of law, or a country of chaos, fear, and hate? No. And the beauty of our democracy is that each one of us has the power to answer that question. And the power, then I say, is with the people. The power is with the people. We have a fight ahead of us. We've got a fight ahead of us. And we are the underdogs in this race. Okay? Level set. We're the underdogs in this race. But this is a people power campaign. And we have momentum. The day after I announced my candidacy, we saw the best 24 hours of grassroots fundraising in presidential campaign history. And you may have noticed, Donald Trump has been resorting to some wild lies about my record, and some of what he and his running mate are saying, well, it's just plain weird. I mean, that's the box you put that in, right? You may have seen me just pulled out of our debate. Right? I hope he reconsiders, because we have a lot to talk about.
All right, let's introduce our guests on Global Lens tonight. Joining me on the show is Pramitpal Chaudhary, Foreign Affairs Analyst at the Eurasia Group, Ambassador Suresh Goyal, former Indian diplomat, Pathikrit Pine, Foreign Affairs Analyst. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining me. Pramitpal Chaudhary, if I could begin with you. A lot has changed since you and I last spoke about the US presidential election. It is no longer Biden versus Trump. It is Kamala Harris versus Trump. Trump is now the much older candidate in the fray. Now, it's interesting what has been reported, that Kamala Harris's campaign has raised a whopping $200 million in just the 1 week since President Biden decided to step aside and immediately endorsed her as the presidential candidate. Since then, she has received endorsements from the Obamas, Hillary Clinton, Nancy Pelosi, and most influential Democrats in the US Congress. What do you make of what Kamala Harris told her supporters? She says we are the underdogs in this race, but it's a people-powered campaign and we have momentum. Do you think she's playing it smart by calling herself the underdog in the race? Is she being realistic? How do you see the campaign as it's now panning out?
Well, she is right to say underdog in the sense that in the popular vote, Trump still leads her on the average of polls. Since obviously polls do have different numbers, but the average of polls still gives Trump a small lead of about 1.7% in the popular vote. But as you know, in America, what matters is the electoral college, not the popular vote. Democrats normally win the popular vote in almost every major US election in the past 20 years or so. It's been the electoral college where they lose because that is skewed in favor of small states, particularly in the Midwest and the South, which tends to be Republican strongholds. And there she is trailing by a substantial amount, about 70 to 80 electoral college votes. And it'll be the 6 so-called battleground or swing states which will matter. But she is obviously in a much better place than Biden was. In every one of these polls, she has reduced she's reduced Biden's margin by about half. I would say of the 6 battleground states, Biden was trailing in all 6 at one point. She has now reduced that to 4, possibly 3, depending on the polls you read. Some states like North Carolina, we don't actually have any polling that has her versus Trump. So all in all, she is in a much better shape. And obviously the momentum is with her right now because of the nature of how she's come in. She's dominating the news cycle in a way that Trump dominated for a short while with the assassination bid. The money is useful, but you have to realize a lot of money was held back because of concerns about Biden, and a lot of Democratic donors are holding that money back. So it's now come in a bit of a flood. But keep in mind, a US election is very expensive. $200 million sounds a lot, but like the 2020 election cycle was, if I remember correctly, something on the lines of $20 billion was spent. So $200 million, I mean, that includes Senate and House, but about half of that money goes to the presidential election. So yes, it's useful, but what it really indicates is that she looks like she's being able to consolidate a very strong anti-Trump vote. That there are a lot of people very unhappy with Trump, even among the conservatives, and especially among independent voters who have kind of said, we prefer Biden over Trump, or we don't really like Trump, but Biden is clearly not presidential material. So for Kamala Harris now, I think what her game now is to be able to persuade those independent voters that yes, and they can be as much, depending on the polling again, 20 to 25% of the electorate, to make them believe that she is actually presidential material. Because one of the continuing weaknesses she does have is that her policy record is very, very weak. She has not done anything. She's never been a minister. Her record as a senator is weak, and as obviously vice presidents don't have very much to do. But she's got 4 months to persuade people otherwise, and Trump is prone to tripping himself over. So we'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. Of course, the big question remains, can she capture the imagination of enough Americans to be able to defeat Donald Trump, who does continue to be in the lead in most polls, undoubtedly. Ambassador Suresh Goyal, let me ask you this question. We know that the Democratic National Convention is going to be held next week. Until just a few days ago, there was a lot of speculation about whether we could see an open convention with some governors throwing their hat into the ring. But now that Kamala Harris has received endorsement from none other than President Biden, the Obamas, arguably the most towering figures in the Democratic Party, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, and pretty much every influential Democrat who really matters on Capitol Hill. Do you believe her nomination as the Democratic Party nominee candidate is a done deal, and that this convention is only going to put an official stamp on it, and there is really no chance, you believe, of anybody throwing down a gauntlet to her?
There are still quite a few days left between the convention and today, and therefore there could be surprises along the line. But as the matter stands at the moment, frankly speaking, I really don't think that the Democrats see any alternative to Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris has the advantage of basically having been the vice president and therefore having the kind of profile which really makes her a popular nominee in the Democratic Party. Biden having burnt the bridges really in the very first debate, it was almost certain that Democrats will have to find a new nominee. If the process had begun 1 year ago, I think there was a possibility of trying to find alternative nominees. But at this short notice, and the presidential race is a long one really, where several town hall meetings, several rallies have to be held. And it's already a very tight race. And in fact, I think when Kamala Harris says that she's an underdog, what she means is the time she has really to prepare for her campaign. Given the kind of a time frame we had in mind, I doubt very much that any other candidate will want to throw their hand in the ring and take the risk that Kamala Harris already is assuming, given the kind of support that she has. That is one. Number two, I would say that even though the gap between Trump and Kamala Harris is just around 2%, 3%, or whatever, there are always a bit of errors and all that. I think Trump is really facing a tough challenge now in the race and that is the reason that Kamala Harris's nomination is really putting him to this kind of a task where he's calling her names really, left liberal and so forth, really going beyond, the kind of a name calling which is beyond imagination in the US presidential election. And therefore, I think Trump is feeling under pressure with this kind of sudden change. He had never thought that Biden would actually finally give up and withdraw from the race. So let us see what happens. But I think, and I'm more or less certain, that Kamala Harris will get the nomination in the convention.
So getting
Yes.
the nomination at the Democratic National Convention is perhaps almost a done deal. The question is, can she beat Donald Trump at the hustings? Okay, let me take this to Patikrit Payan. Patikrit Payan, yes, Kamala Harris does not have adequate time to prepare for this election, which is now barely 4 months away. I think we can also agree that Biden deciding to step aside, even if he did it under pressure from his party, must have caught Trump off guard, and polls suggest that Harris is doing way better against Trump than Biden was. The question now is, Kamala Harris has already made history by becoming the first woman vice president of the United States of America, but do you believe she has it in her to smash the ultimate glass ceiling in American politics, or, you know, society for that matter, by becoming the first woman president of the country and also the first president of South Asian descent? Do you believe she can go all the way?
Well, Neha, good evening, first of all. No, if somebody like her becoming a president or just being a South Asian descent doesn't necessarily excite me, frankly, because as a person, you have already elicited that issue about she not being extremely, she hasn't shown her caliber as a vice president as such. Look, Vivek Ramaswamy actually made it very clear much before Biden resigned or gave up that eventually it's not going to be Biden, or it would be somebody else. Frankly speaking, the society today in the United States is deeply polarized. We all know that. So today the election, when it would happen in the United States, it would still veer around Trump. People will either vote for Trump, people will vote against Trump. It will not steer around Kamala Harris, that people will vote for Kamala Harris and against Kamala Harris. I would be very interested to see if there is another round of debate between Trump and the new presidential candidate from the Democrat side, which is Kamala Harris, and how she fares over there.
It seems like Trump is not interested. Apparently, the Trump campaign has said they're not interested in debating Kamala.
So once let's see what happens. That's their prerogative. If they, I'm just saying, this is my view. So what I'm trying to say is this: see, the American elections are always very chaotic. You have a situation today, as I mentioned, it is very polarized. Secondly, if it has to be on the basis of merit, what does Harris bring on the table which is different from what Biden has done? I mean, she would keep on saying about issues of rule of law, fear, hate, free speech. That is fine. And I'm sure there is a significant portion of the American population who are voters who would accept that and go and vote for her. That's their choice. The issue is what difference she would do on the issue of Ukraine. The issue is what difference she would do on Middle East, something that would interest us more, sitting in India. On the issue of immigration, what would be her stand? On the issue of the so-called wokeism that is coming, what was her stand? So that is something that would be interesting to watch. The other important thing is this, that if you look at the American elections today, the election process is such, there are a large number of sections in the United States where you even don't even need a voter ID card to go and vote. A large number of immigrants, those who have come before, illegal immigrants, not the legal ones, they might go and vote. So what happens during the election process? And I think the Democrats have worked quite a bit in the last 4 years in that. I think the Republicans have not done that work in terms of trying to change or improve the electoral process in the United States. So in that context, if you ask me, I would say Kamala Harris has an edge because of the electoral process and what can be done in that. But if you talk about merit, then I have question mark, because Kamala Harris has not made it clear what is her stand on Ukraine, what is her stand on NATO, and the other things that I mentioned. The other important issue is this, that, frankly speaking, she keeps on saying that she represents the the black community. That is another thing. I mean, if you look at many of the cities or the states of districts of United States, I have been interacting with some of my friends over there. It is not that everyone who is of an African origin is pro-Harris. It is no more like that because of the societal chaos that is coming in
It may
over
not
there.
be,
So
but
there
you know,
has been-
I will play the devil's advocate and flip that argument around and say that if the Trump campaign continues to target Kamala Harris on the issue of race, then there is a very strong possibility that they do end up alienating the black voters who at the end of the day do constitute a very important segment of American voters. And I believe that is a warning that has been given to the Trump campaign by some of their advisors. But since Pramit Pal Chaudhary has to leave and we have limited time, I'll come back to you, Patikrit. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, do you believe, having served as his vice president for 4 years, Kamala Harris in the next 4 months can distance herself from Biden's legacy and some of his controversial policies, such as on immigration and the Israel-Hamas war? That's one. Two, on the issue of women's rights, abortion, we know how vocal Kamala Harris has been. In fact, the campaign slogan has shifted from save democracy to choose freedom. And then when you have those old videos of J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, going viral on the social media, where you hear Vance slamming women like Kamala Harris and referring to them in the most derogatory manner possible as childless cat ladies, you've also seen a lot of women, including some famous ones like Taylor Swift, almost rallying around Kamala Harris on these issues. Do you believe the woman factor, particularly on the issue of abortion, could prove to be a very important issue in this election that could work in the favor of Kamala Harris?
So Kamala Harris is actually very similar to Biden in most of her policies. But you're right, on Gaza, for example, she has distanced herself already. When Prime Minister Netanyahu visited Washington recently, she deliberately made sure that she boycotted the congressional meeting that he held, and came out strongly against Netanyahu and the Gaza conflict. And Israelis responded in kind and basically said, we don't care, we'll do whatever we feel like in our national security. But on immigration, it's actually her problem, because immigration is in many ways, the question of illegal immigration is in many ways one of the weakest points for the Democrats. It's something that the Republicans have been able to hit out. Polling indicates that Americans are opposed to illegal migrants. Most of them are supportive of legal migration. She was asked at one point as vice president to handle the migration issue and made a hash of it. So it's not as her strong point. But if immigration is the Democratic weak point, abortion, as you rightly said, is the Republican weak point. The combination of, but Trump, it's noticeable, has diluted his position on abortion. He has made sure that the Republican manifesto does not come out strongly on this issue, sort of said let the states decide these things. He's also not come out against gay marriage. He's just said we support the sanctity of marriage. But Vance has been useful for the Democrats because he's come out very strongly, taking up a very far right or far Christian position, and they've obviously played on that. But yes, I think the issues of abortion and the issues of immigration, in many ways, are going to be two of the core things that the two candidates will fight about. And as you've noticed in the presidential debate between Biden and Trump, that's exactly what Trump kept hitting Biden on, was migration. Everything got blamed on immigrants. Biden was supposed to have hit back on abortion, but was too mentally confused to be able to do so. But yes, those are going to be two crucial issues that you're going to see dominate perhaps the election. And Harris really her problem will be she has only 4 months to make it clear that she is competent enough to come up with policy solutions, especially on the issue of migration.
Okay, very quickly before we let you go, Pramit, we've heard Kamala Biden saying if there's a debate with Trump, she will wipe the floor with him. So I'm going to ask you, what's your assessment? Will Trump agree to debate Kamala Harris? She has said she's not going to do a Fox debate. Do you believe it's going to happen?
I don't think Trump will bother because he's leading right now. And as long as he's leading in the battleground states, the swing states in the electoral college, he doesn't care about the popular vote. That doesn't matter in the end. He has no reason to debate. Obviously, she is going to be a very different kettle of fish than Biden is. And so his view, if I'm ahead, if it's working, why fix it? And so we're going to see, I would say he would avoid it as long as he leads in the battleground states. If he starts to slip there, then it's possible that he may be prepared to consider that. But I think what we're also waiting to see with Harris is who is going to be her vice presidential candidate, because it's almost certain that she will choose somebody from one of the battleground states. And it'll be almost certainly a white male to sort of balance the ticket, if you wish. And that may also give her another boost, in which case it then becomes potentially neck and neck, at least on the popular vote, and even brings the battleground states into contention.
Right. Well, I'm certainly rooting for Pete Buttigieg there. We don't know if he will make the cut, but he certainly looks like an interesting candidate. We'll leave it at that. Pramit Pal Chaudhary, thank you so much for joining us on the show. Ambassador Suresh Goyal and Patikrit Payan will stay on with us. I'm taking a quick break here on Global Lens. On the other side, we're going to discuss what's happening in the Middle East. Could Israel and Hezbollah be on the brink of a full-blown war? On the other side.
Hey, careful, huh? My daddy got it from abroad. Hey, disaster! How will you pay for the loss now?
In stock market, you should take risk as per your capacity and knowledge. Trade in options very carefully.
Wow, Dikra! Absolutely perfect. Take risk with full understanding.
सोच कर, समझ कर, invest कर.
इस खेल में अब खेला होगा, हर नहले पे दहला होगा. ये बड़ा है, स्टेज बड़ा है, पूरा भारत साथ खड़ा है. We are the tigers. साथ खड़ा है. We are the tigers. गेम बड़ा है. Dribble like a rap, pass, 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 setting up the trap. Kick it hard in the ball. Chuck, there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball. Chuck there for the ball.
How do you fulfill that promise? Because ultimately expectations have to be met. If you look at the political landscape, is it really changing for women? And what is the inability of the forces that dead bodies surface but not the living people?
जानना है तो देखिए, समझना है तो सुनिए, सीखना है तो पूछिए, और कमाना है तो खरीदिए। जानकारी, सलाह और निवेश सब एक ही सुपर ऐप पर। पैसे का सवाल है तो जवाब है मनी 9। आजादी पैसे की। अभी डाउनलोड करें।
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters, bringing you the news 24/7. For the smart audiences on the smartest TVs. News 9 Live. Stream now on your smart TVs.
Over 20 healthcare trailblazers and leaders. 6 engaging sessions. 6 hours of engrossing conversations. Top trending healthcare issues. The Healthcare Summit 2024, an initiative by the TV9 Network and South First. Streaming on 3rd of August, only on News 9.
Welcome back. You're watching Global Lens on News 9 Live with me, Neha Khanna. Let's now turn our attention to the escalating tensions in the Middle East. Thousands of mourners joined a funeral procession on Sunday for 12 children who were killed in a rocket attack on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. It marks the single deadliest attack in Israel or Israeli-annexed territory since Hamas's terror attacks sparked the Gaza war on the 7th of October. A rocket, which Israel says was launched by Hezbollah from Sheba in southern Lebanon, slammed into a soccer pitch. 12 children between the ages of 10 and 18 were killed while taking part in a training session. Hezbollah has denied responsibility for the strike, but many have expressed concern that the latest strike may have placed Israel and Hezbollah on the brink of an all-out war. If Israel's foreign minister Israel Katz is to be believed, it probably will. He said, "We are approaching the moment of an all-out war against Hezbollah. The response to this event will be in accordance." The United States has apparently blessed retaliatory action to some degree. "We stand by Israel's right to defend its citizens from terrorist attacks." That's what Secretary of State Antony Blinken said, but then he quickly added that the US did not want to see the conflict escalate. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant has vowed to hit the enemy hard. Meanwhile, Hezbollah has evacuated positions in South and East Lebanon after Israeli threats of reprisals.
Thousands of mourners joined a funeral procession on Sunday for 12 children who were killed in a rocket attack on the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. It marks the single deadliest attack in Israel or Israeli-annexed territory since Hamas's assault sparked the Gaza war on October 7th. And it is fueling fears of significant escalation between Israel and Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said he visited the town of Majd al-Shams early on Sunday, describing the site of the attack as, quote, a place where innocent girls and boys were murdered during a soccer game. He vowed to retaliate against Hezbollah for the strike. Hezbollah initially announced it fired rockets at Israeli military sites in the Golan Heights, but denied involvement in the attack on Majd al-Shams.
There is no justification for terrorism, period. And every indication is that indeed the rockets were the rocket was from Hezbollah.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Tokyo said Israel had the right to defend itself. But he said Washington also did not want to see further escalation in violence.
We don't want to see it spread. That has been one of our goals from day one, from October 7th on.
Majd al-Shams is a Druze village. The Druze are an Arab minority who practice a form of Islam and make up more than half of the 40,000-strong population of the Golan Heights, territory captured from Syria by Israel in the 1967 Middle East War and annexed in a move not recognized by most countries. Here's one resident who calls himself Haytham. He says, "We need to strive now to sign a deal and stop this damned war. We want to live. We don't want to die." Israeli and Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon have been exchanging fire for months, but appeared to be avoiding an escalation that could lead to all-out war. Saturday's strike threatened to tip the standoff into a more dangerous phase, and United Nations officials urged maximum restraint from both sides. The conflict has forced tens of thousands of people in both Lebanon and Israel to leave their homes.
We are deeply saddened by the loss of life that we saw. There is no justification for terrorism, period. And every indication is that indeed the rockets were the rocket was from Hezbollah. We stand by Israel's right to defend its citizens from terrorist attacks. We're in conversations with the government of Israel. And again, I emphasize its right to defend its citizens and our determination to make sure that they're able to do that. But we also don't want to see the conflict escalate. We don't want to see it spread. That has been one of our goals from day one, from October 7th on.
All right, Ambassador Suresh Goel and Patikrit Pine are still with us, and joining me on the show at this point is Yeshaya Rosenman, head of the South Asia project at NGO Sharika and journalist at Jerusalem Post. Thanks very much to all of you for joining me. Yeshaya Rosenman, if I could begin with you. The Israeli foreign minister has already said we're approaching the moment of an all-out war against Hezbollah. Given the latest strike in which 12 children were killed, do you believe that's where Israel and Hezbollah are headed?
Good evening. Yes, I believe that's where they are headed. The timeline is unclear. But a gun that appears in the first part of the play will shoot in the end. By the end, Hezbollah did not amass 150,000 rockets just to put in a museum exhibition. They have, I believe, 40,000 or maybe more soldiers of the elite Radwan unit in southern Lebanon. These are not peaceful actions. As it was stated before, over 3,000 missiles have already been shot at Israel. Over 600 houses have been destroyed. Tens of thousands of acres of forest and forest land. I believe an all-out war might actually bring the war to the end. The problem is that Hezbollah has taken over. It's a militia that controls Lebanon in essence, and in order to free Lebanon from Hezbollah's grasp, you would have to go after the patrons of Hezbollah, Iran, and that I don't know if there's a will to do that.
All right, let me take this to Ambassador Suresh Goel. Ambassador Goel, for months now, concerns have been expressed about how the Israel-Hamas war in Gaza could spill over and escalate into a wider regional conflict. While tensions between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon are not new, but do you believe that with the Sunday attack, things may have reached a point of no return?
Neha, I will speak from my heart at the moment, really, because I spent 4 years in Cairo, where I saw the Arab politics from very close quarters at the Arab League, and where I saw basically that the Arab politics was a kind of mix of both Islam versus Jews issue, as well as the issue of really the Arabs versus Israelis. It's a cauldron of really indifference, fights, problems. I was in Jerusalem when I was actually there on a touristic visit, and I was in Jerusalem on a Good Friday, and I had the occasion to see the 3 processions of the Muslims who were Palestinian Muslims from Jerusalem going to Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Jews going to the wall to the day of Sabbath, and the Christians, Good Friday, going to the church of the Al-Sepulchre Church. When they came face to face with each other, the hatred and the kind of distrust in their eyes was to be seen, to be believed. And I'm afraid what is now happening is really this cauldron is coming to a boil, where the religious issues as well as the issues of the different communities, for lack of a better word, are coming together now. And therefore, I am concerned that unless it is controlled now, it could lead to an all-out war, and that all-out war will not lead to peace. That all-out war is going to engulf the whole region into flames, and that the region of Middle East going into, if you know the geopolitics of the region, and that war has the danger of spilling over to the other areas. And therefore, I'm concerned. I'm concerned that's what has happened. And Blinken's statement is wishy-washy. rather than trying to put water on the fires, douse fires and trying to bring things under control, he has left it really to the Israelis and to the Middle Easterns. Being the election year, I don't think we could expect anything better from them. And there we are, faced with a situation which could create a problem for the whole world now. And the USA trying to opt out of the situation after, and I'm not choosing my words very carefully, after having made Mura out of the problem with their own military industrial complex. And Ukraine and Middle East now, I think we are now at the mercy of uncertain trends in the region. Neha.
You're quite right. I mean, at the end of the day, these are heavily armed militias that we're talking about. These are not governments. These are the elements that eventually we will be dealing with. And you're quite right. The United States has played such an active role in the Middle East conflict by being Israel's single biggest supporter since the beginning of this war. Can it now wash its hands of what's happening currently? Patikrit Pan, let me ask you this. Antony Blinken's statement is not just ambivalent, it means almost nothing. We don't want the conflict to escalate, but Israelis have the right to defend their citizens in the face of terror. The question is, how much worse do you think this is going to get between Israel and Hezbollah? Are the two headed for a full-blown war? And if that does turn out to be the case, what does that mean for the Middle East and the international community at large?
So, Neha, in the next 4 or 5 years, there's going to be a lot of chaos across the world, in Western Europe, United States, in Middle East, in South China Sea, even in South Asia. So, if you ask me, I'm not surprised by what's happening. It's all leading to one particular direction. Right now, if you ask me, yes, I think the Israeli Prime Minister will be under tremendous pressure to retaliate. He might be nudged by the Americans not to do it right away. Of course, some deep, there have been certain bombing deep inside Lebanon right now. But he might stop short of actually declaring a war right away. The problem is, after the attack on the Hodeidah port in Yemen, of course, and if you ask me, it was needed, because what the Houthis have been doing in that whole Gulf of Aden and disturbing the entire maritime trade. So after that, Houthis will retaliate. Now, if the Houthis retaliate, and then there will be a bigger assault by Israel on Yemen. In that case, Hezbollah will be compelled to again do what they did a couple of days back. And in that kind of a scenario, no one can stop Israel to actually go for a full-fledged war with Israel, with Hezbollah. The issue is this: we must not forget that these are all proxies of Iran, funded, trained, incubated, armed by Iran. So a day might come, may not come 1 day or 2 days, but if a full frontal war with Hezbollah starts, maybe in the next 1 month or 15 days, you never know, depending upon when the Houthis strike back. And that would happen whether we like it or not. So a possibility of the main entity in the shadow coming front, and you might be having a full-fledged Iran-Israel conflict cannot be ruled out. United States and the Secretary of State is not ambivalent today. For the last 4 years, like Blinken has been ambivalent on every issue. So then for United States to sit tight will be difficult. They will be willing to come. The issue is this, Neha. I think the Israelis know what kind of environment they live in. They are willing to give it all to fight it out, because they know the kind of situation that is there for them. How many American body bags are the American government willing to take back home? That's where the issue comes. And given the kind of mess the Americans and the NATO have created in Ukraine, by funding them, arming them, I will not be surprised. And that process has started by the Russians putting their fleet on the go to station somewhere in Mediterranean or this side, to ensure that if the Americans get involved, the Russians will do the needful. So we are getting into a clear mess, and that mess was started first and foremost in Ukraine, preceded by what happened in Syria. It is a situation where you cannot say one side is responsible, the other side is a holy cow. You say that Israelis have been supported by the Americans. What about the Hamas leadership in Qatar? Qatar being one of the biggest allies of United States, and and Hamas leadership being there, US have been absolutely okay with it. So there is a double game with many of these NATO countries, and West has played. Today, many other countries, including the likes of India, will pay a price for it, because if things go bad in Middle East, in which eventually the Russians might commit with the fleet the way it happened in 1971 to prevent the Americans, brace up for a difficult 3-4 years coming. It may not be a world war tomorrow, but it will be tremendous chaos across the world, and it would have tremendous impact on commodity pricing, inflation, and every other thing, including lone wolf terror attacks, everything included. We don't know what is going to happen eventually, Neha, but it's going to be very bad.
Tremendous chaos around the globe. Both Ambassador Goel and Patikrit Pine are painting a very ominous picture, but then that is how grim things really are at the moment. And there is no doubt that countries like the United States have engaged in a lot of duplicity on multiple occasions. As we wrap up this discussion, Yeshaya Rosenman, let me ask you this question. You know, so far Iran has operated in the shadows. Of course, it is widely believed that all these militias, from Hamas to the Houthis to Hezbollah, have been operating with the blessings of Iran. They've received their training, weaponry, funding, everything from that country. But so far, Iran has steered clear of engaging directly in a conflict with Israel. But if an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah does indeed erupt, do you believe there is a possibility, as Patikrit Pine mentioned, of Iran getting directly involved in the war at some point in the future?
So yes, first of all, let me remind the viewers that I forgot the exact date, but Iran had shot over 300 ballistic missiles and other aircraft, suicide aircraft and other projectiles at Israel in one night, and they were all taken down by the Israeli airborne defense systems. Yes, there is a chance of Iran getting involved to defend its ring of fire, as Qasem Soleimani used to call it. Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, all these proxies. Nobody doubts that these people are sponsored by Hamas, by Iran. It is not doubted at all. I mean, if you see now for the inauguration of the new Iranian president, Hamas leadership is there. I saw even the Prime Minister of France spoke to the new president of Iran. Again, this is I completely agree with Mr. Pine. This is very duplicitous behavior. It should be understood that restraining Israel is not the answer. Israel is a responsible actor, and restraining us is simply restraining the only responsible actor in the scene, and denying the actual perpetrators of the crimes, people who openly say death to Israel, death to America. I think Western powers such as France and the United States and others are living in denial as to the nature of the Iranian regime. The version of radical revolutionary Islam that they subscribe to is genocidal. When children at Hezbollah rallies do a Hitler salute, they genuinely mean what they are doing. When Hamas is caught with ISIS flags and copies of Mein Kampf, they genuinely believe in this ideology of killing Jews, hiding behind trees and rocks. So I think I think there has to be more moral clarity on what each side actually believes in, and the notion that all the problems in the Middle East are dependent on Israel, and we have to restrain Israel and not the bad faith actors, is simply mistaken. And I hope that the new after the elections in the United States, the new government will have a more responsible line on these issues.
Okay, we'll have to really wait and see what America's stand is going to be once this election is over, especially if you have a new president in the form of Donald Trump. But the bigger question staring us in the face at the moment is this: just how much worse are things going to get in the Middle East? Are we going to see a much wider regional conflagration, and are the flames going to be felt by the entire world? We will leave it at that. Yeshaya Rosenman, Patikrit Pine, Pramit Pal, Ambassador Suresh Goel, thanks to all of you for joining me on Global Lens tonight. All right, let's now turn our attention to the chaos in Venezuelan politics following the presidential election in that country. Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro and his political opponents both claim to have won the presidential election, even as the United States and multiple regional nations have voiced skepticism about official results handing victory to the strongman leader. With 80% of votes counted, Maduro won more than 51% of the vote, besting the Democratic Unitary Platform candidate Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia, who gained more than 44% according to official agencies. But the opposition painted a very different picture of the results. Opposition leader Maria Corina Machado said in a news conference that their own records showed their candidate Edmundo Gonzalez Urrutia had received 70% of the vote against Maduro's 30%. We won and everyone knows it, Machado said, adding that the opposition would defend the truth. The entire international community knows what happened in Venezuela and how people voted for change, she said.
Both sides of Venezuela's Sunday election claimed victory in the early hours of Monday morning in a vote that saw accusations of underhanded tactics and reports of isolated incidents of violence. The country's electoral authority announced just after midnight that Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro had won a third term with 51% of the vote, despite multiple exit polls pointing to an opposition win. Maduro then declared victory at the presidential palace in the capital, Caracas.
Soy Nicolás Maduro Moro, presidente reelecto de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela.
The election authority said that with over 80% of ballot boxes counted, opposition rival Edmundo Gonzalez won 44% of the vote. They added that results had been delayed because of a, quote, aggression against the electoral data transmission system. Meanwhile, opposition leader Maria Corina Machado claimed Gonzalez had won in a landslide with 70% of the vote. Gonzalez, a 74-year-old ex-diplomat known for his calm demeanor, made no concessions to Maduro in later remarks, but made clear that he was not calling for supporters to take to the streets or commit any acts of violence.
Our message of reconciliation and peaceful change still stands. We are convinced most Venezuelans also desire this. Our struggle continues, and we won't rest until the will of the people of Venezuela is respected.
The opposition alleges that the election authority, which is meant to be an independent body, acts as an arm of the government. Their call for Maduro contradicts multiple exit polls, including one from Edison Research predicting that Gonzalez would win 65% of the vote, while Maduro would win 31%. Another from Meganalysis predicted a 65% vote for Gonzalez and just under 14% for Maduro.
We applaud the Venezuelan people.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, speaking from Tokyo, called for a detailed breakdown of votes.
We have serious concerns that the result announced does not reflect the will or the votes of the Venezuelan people.
In his victory speech, Maduro railed against foreign interference.
When
Donald Trump denounced that he had the election stolen, we didn't meddle with that. We didn't tell them to do this or do that. This is in their hands, an internal affair the United States will solve. So this is what I demand as President of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela. Respect for the Constitution, the public authorities, and the sovereign life of Venezuela.
Machado, the opposition leader, also called on the country's military on X to uphold the results of the vote, saying, quote, "It is time to put yourselves on the right side of history. You have a chance, and it's now." Venezuela's military has always supported Maduro, the 61-year-old former bus driver and foreign minister. There were no public signs that leaders of the armed forces were breaking from the government.
All right, let's now get you the latest on the Quad foreign ministers meeting in Tokyo. It is only the Quad nations' collaboration that can ensure that the Indo-Pacific region remains free, open, stable and secure. That's what India's External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar said today, insisting that the grouping is here to stay and to grow. In his opening statement at the Quad Foreign Ministers meeting in Tokyo, Jaishankar said the Quad's commitment to doing global good has resonance far beyond the region. Later in the day, the Quad Foreign Ministers issued a joint statement with crystal clear references to China. The statement says, and I quote, "We reaffirm our conviction that international law, including respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and the maintenance of peace, safety, security and stability in the maritime domain, underpin the development and prosperity of the Indo-Pacific. We emphasize the importance of adherence to international law, particularly as reflected in the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea." In fact, the statement then goes on to say, "We are seriously concerned about the situation in the East and the South China Seas and reiterate our strong opposition to any unilateral actions that seek to change the status quo by force or coercion. We continue to express our serious concern about the militarization of disputed features and coercive and intimidating maneuvers in the South China Sea. We also express our serious concern about the dangerous use of Coast Guard and maritime militia vessels." In fact, not only were there references to China, significantly, there were also very important references to terrorism and Pakistan in particular. On the issue of terrorism, the statement makes a direct reference to Pakistan and its role in fomenting cross-border terrorism in India. It states, and I quote, "We unequivocally condemn terrorism and violent extremism in all its forms and manifestations, including cross-border terrorism. We deplore the use of unmanned aerial vehicles, drones, tunnels and information and communication technologies by terrorists and terrorist entities. We strongly reiterate our condemnation of terror attacks, including the 26/11 Mumbai terror attacks and the Pathankot terror attack, and call for bringing the perpetrators of these attacks to justice without delay. We urge all countries to take immediate and irreversible action to prevent territory under their control from being used for terrorist purposes." In fact, several terror organizations have also been named in this particular statement. These include several UN-listed terror groups such as Al-Qaeda, ISIS, the Lashkar-e-Taiba and the Jaish-e-Mohammed. Notably, the last two are based in Pakistan. All right, that's all the time we have on this edition of Global Lens. Thanks so much for watching. Do join us again at the same time tomorrow. Good night.
This is News 9 Live, India's only digital exclusive live stream. For the early adopters,